It started on the quietest night in our neighborhood. The streetlights buzzed. The crickets sang. And then, a black SUV rolled up to my grandpa's house. 3 men stepped out, shirts that said HOA enforcement, but their eyes told another story. They knocked on his door. They smiled, but their smiles had teeth, and the moment Grandpa refused to bow to them, everything snapped, including his arm. But what those fake cops didn't know is that by the next morning, the roar of engines would shake the entire street, and their worst nightmare was waiting just around the corner. Welcome back to the HOA Society, the channel where suburban rules turn into suburban wars. My name is Daniel. I'm just an ordinary guy living in a small HOA neighborhood in Texas. I work a regular job, fix cars at a local shop. But what I witnessed here, what happened to my grandpa that night, it changed everything. This is the story of how fake HOA cops came to our door, and how my biker cousins taught them a brutal lesson they will never forget. It started the night the fake HOA cops came to our door. My grandpa was sitting on his old porch chair, rocking slow, his good hand holding a cold lemonade, his bad arm resting in the sling they had forced on him. The cast was heavy, but heavier was the silence in the street. I remember the glow of that black SUV creeping around the corner, like a predator sliding into the cul-de-sac. The engine hummed low, too smooth for real cops, too polished for men who claimed to protect us. I watched from my bedroom window, half hidden behind the curtain, and when the doors opened, 3 men stepped out. They wore black shirts, bold white letters printed across their backs, HOA enforcement. But there was no badge, no real authority, only that fake uniform and the arrogance in their steps. They didn't walk like police. They walked like thugs, and when their boots hit our driveway, I felt my chest tighten. One of them knocked on Grandpa's door, hard, like he owned the place. Grandpa wheeled himself forward, slow but steady, and opened the screen. The man smirked, tilted his head, and said words that chilled me. "You owe fines. For grass too tall, for paint too faded, and for refusing board orders." Grandpa squinted, his voice calm but sharp. "You boys think a t-shirt makes you law?" The men laughed, but their laughter wasn't funny. It was hungry. Grandpa tried to close the door, but one of them shoved his foot inside. That's when I saw it happen. The shove, the fall, the sound of bone cracking. Grandpa's scream cut through the night. A sound that still rattles my bones when I think of it. I wanted to run down, to fight, but I froze. They left him there, broken, humiliated, like it was nothing. And then they climbed back into their SUV and drove off. Like ghosts fading into the night, I rushed to Grandpa, held him. He whispered with his teeth clenched, "Don't call the cops. They won't help." And he was right, because in our neighborhood, the HOA was the law, even when it was fake. The next morning, the sunlight didn't feel warm. It felt cruel. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, pretending they hadn't seen a thing. The board sent no letter, no apology, only silence. But silence is louder than screams sometimes. And I couldn't take it. That's when I made the call, not to the sheriff, not to the hospital, but to my cousins. My cousins weren't ordinary. They were bikers, men of the road, leather jackets heavy with patches, voices deep from smoke and whiskey. They lived by their own code, and family was sacred to them. When I told them what happened, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then the deep voice of my cousin Mark growled, "We'll handle it." That night I couldn't sleep, my stomach twisted with fear and hope. Would they really come? Would they really risk everything for Grandpa? The answer came at sunrise. The roar of engines shattered the morning calm. 1 bike, then 2, then 10. The ground shook beneath my feet as they turned into our street. Neighbors stumbled out of their doors, jaws dropping as chrome and leather filled the cul-de-sac. Grandpa rolled out onto the porch, cast heavy, eyes shining with something I hadn't seen since before the fall. Hope. He looked at me and whispered. They came. Mark stepped off his bike, tall, broad, tattoos down his arms like war paint. He hugged Grandpa gently, then turned to me. "Where are they?" he said. His voice wasn't a question, it was a promise. I pointed down the street, to the fake enforcer's SUV parked outside the HOA office. The bikers didn't wait. They marched, boots stomping, the whole neighborhood watching from behind curtains and half-open doors. For the first time, the power shifted. The HOA wasn't in control anymore. I stayed with Grandpa. But my heart pounded as I heard the shouts. The fake cops tried to talk tough, but their voices cracked. And then, they were dragged out into the cul-de-sac, forced to their knees, their hands bound behind them. Just like they had tried to bind Grandpa with their fake power. The bikers circled them, engines rumbling low like growling beasts. Mark stood in front, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Which one of you broke the old man's arm?" he asked. Silence. Only the sound of engines, and the faint cry of a neighbor's baby through an open window. Grandpa wheeled himself forward. Every move slow but steady. He looked at them. Those men who thought fear could make them kings. And he smiled. Not because he forgave them, but because he knew karma had arrived. That moment, standing there. I realized something. HOA power isn't real. It's fear. It only works when we bow to it. But when we rise, when family stands together, it crumbles. The bikers didn't need weapons. Their presence, their loyalty, their sheer will was enough. The fake cops begged, swore they'd never return. The neighbors watched, and for the first time, they saw the board wasn't untouchable. Grandpa leaned toward me and whispered, "We win by standing tall, even when we sit in a chair." I'll never forget that line, because that night, justice didn't come from a badge. It came from family. The cul-de-sac was never the same after that morning. Engines still echoed in my ears, neighbors still whispered behind curtains, and Grandpa still sat tall in his chair, cast across his arm like a battle scar. But the HOA wasn't finished with us. Power never gives up easy. It always fights back, and sometimes it fights dirty. That afternoon, a letter slid under our door, thick paper, heavy ink, stamped with the HOA seal. It said Grandpa was being fined, not for grass, not for paint, but for harassment. Harassment against the very same men who had broken his arm. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. Grandpa only laughed, a dry laugh that cracked the silence. "They're scared," he said. "Scared men write lies on paper." But I wasn't laughing. I was boiling. I called Mark, told him about the letter. He growled so low it felt like thunder. "They want war," he said. "We'll give it to them." The next day, the bikers stayed parked in our street, engines silent, but their presence louder than any sound. The HOA board members, prim and polished, walked past with their clipboards and fake smiles. They avoided eye contact, but their tight lips told the truth. They hated losing control, and they wanted it back. At night, more letters came, threats of lawsuits, threats of eviction, even threats of jail. Each letter thicker than the last, each word dripping with arrogance. They thought paper could break us, but paper burns, and loyalty does not. Grandpa held one of the letters over the fire pit, watched it curl into ash. "This is their weapon," he said, "and this is ours." The flames swallowed the words, and for the first time I saw fear in the HOA's eyes. Not ours, but fear makes enemies dangerous. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the bikers drank beer in the driveway, a police cruiser rolled into our street, not a fake one, a real one this time. The officer stepped out, his hand already on his belt. He said the HOA had filed a complaint, that our street was unsafe, that the bikers were a threat to the peace. Mark stepped forward, calm but sharp. "Peace?" he said. "Where was peace when that old man's arm was broken?" The officer shifted uneasily, eyes darting from the bikers to Grandpa in his chair. He knew something wasn't right. But rules are rules, and sometimes rules are cages. He told us to disperse, to send the bikers away, but family doesn't walk away. Not when blood is spilled. So Mark stood firm. "If you want us gone," he said, "then arrest us all." The officer didn't. He looked at the bikers, looked at the neighbors watching, looked at Grandpa's cast, and then he left. his cruiser rolling out as quietly as it came. But I knew this wasn't the end. The HOA board was humiliated. They had tried letters, threats, and now the law, and every time, they failed. That kind of failure doesn't make people quit. It makes them furious. One night, I heard glass shatter. I ran to the porch and saw it, a brick, thrown through Grandpa's window, wrapped in tape, and paper attached to it. The note said only 3 words, "Leave or else." Grandpa sat calm in his chair, glass all around his feet. He picked up the note, smiled faintly, and handed it to me. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperate men are weak." But my hand shook as I held that note, because weakness got it. "This can still be dangerous," I told Mark, and by morning, the bikers weren't just in our street, they were patrolling it, engines roaring up and down, headlights sweeping the houses, leather jackets gleaming under the moonlight. The neighbors didn't complain. They felt safer than they had in years, and slowly, whispers turned into courage. Mrs. Ramirez from across the street came over with cookies. She whispered, "They fined me for planting the wrong flowers." Mr. Cole down the block admitted, "They threatened to tow my car because it was old." One by one, the neighbors began to speak. The HOA had ruled us with fear, but now fear was breaking. That's when Grandpa said something that stuck in my soul. "They're not just fighting us," he said. "They're fighting the whole neighborhood. They just don't know it yet." The next HOA meeting was packed. Usually, 5 people showed up, but this time, the room was full. Grandpa wheeled himself in, cast heavy on his lap. Bikers behind him like shadows of justice. The board sat stiff, papers stacked, voices trembling as they tried to read fines and rules. But the neighbors weren't silent anymore. They shouted back, demanded answers, questioned the money, questioned the lies. The board's power cracked right there in that little community hall, and I watched it break, piece by piece. But victory, real victory, wasn't ours yet, because power doesn't die in public. It dies in the dark, and the board still had shadows to hide in that night. As we celebrated with neighbors in our driveway, Grandpa looked at me with tired eyes. "This isn't over," he whispered. "The worst is still coming." I felt it too, in the pit of my stomach, in the chill of the evening air, because men who lose power either fade away quietly or they strike one last time, and I couldn't tell which choice the board would make. Grandpa was right. The worst was still coming, and we felt it in the air like a storm waiting to break. For a few days, things were quiet, too quiet. The bikers still patrolled the street. Neighbors still peeked out with cautious hope. But the silence wasn't peace. It was planning. And then, the letters stopped coming. No more fines. No more threats on paper. The HOA office stayed dark. Their SUV didn't show up, at first. The neighbors thought we had won, but Grandpa shook his head, his eyes sharp even through the pain. "Men who lose power don't walk away," he said. "They plot." And he was right. 3 nights later, the power went out. Not just in our house, but in the entire block. The streetlights died. The hum of the fridge vanished. The cul-de-sac drowned in black. Then came the sound. Engines, not bikes, but trucks, heavy, slow, rolling into the darkness. I looked out the window, heart pounding. 2 black pickup trucks stopped at the end of the street. Men jumped out. Not in uniforms this time, but in masks. They carried bats, chains. One even had a crowbar gleaming under the moon. These weren't HOA enforcers anymore. These were thugs. I ran to Grandpa, whispered what I saw. He didn't flinch. He only tightened his good fist and said, "Call them." I knew who he meant. Mark and the crew, within minutes. The roar of motorcycles cut through the night. Headlights sliced through the dark, chrome flashing like fire in the shadows. The masked men froze, bats trembling in their hands. And then, the street turned into a battlefield. Engines revved. Boots slammed the pavement. The bikers outnumbered them, outmatched them. The thugs tried to fight, swinging bats, shouting threats, but leather met leather. Steel boots met weak knees. The sound of chains clattering to the ground echoed down the street, one by one. The GS broke, running back to their trucks, speeding into the night with engines screaming louder than their fear. The neighbors poured out of their homes, eyes wide, voices whispering prayers and cheers, and for a moment, victory tasted sweet. But Grandpa, sitting in his chair amidst the chaos, only frowned. "They're testing us," he said. "Next time, it won't be bats." The next day, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. They didn't invite us. They didn't post the notice. But word spread fast. We showed up anyway. The room smelled of fear. Sweat on silk shirts. Desperation in polished shoes. The board president stood tall, but her hands shook as she read from her paper. "We will be filing restraining orders against anyone who associates with motorcycle gangs for the safety of our community." The neighbors gasped. They weren't afraid anymore. They were angry. Mrs. Ramirez shouted, "The only gang we see is you." Mr. Cole slammed his fist on the table. "Where was your safety when our homes were attacked?" Voices rose. Walls shook. The board tried to shout over the noise, but their power was cracking in front of everyone. Mark leaned forward, his voice low but deadly calm. "You call us gangs. We call it family. Touch this family again, and you'll regret it." The board president paled, but still forced a smile. "We are the law here," she said, but everyone in the room knew it was a lie. The law doesn't hide behind letters and thugs. The law doesn't break arms in the night. That night, we celebrated again. But this time, it felt hollow, because Grandpa's words echoed in my head. "Next time, it won't be bats." And I was right to be afraid. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the county courthouse, not an HOA letter, not fake, real paper, real seal, real summons. The board had filed charges against Grandpa, accusing him of violentations, rowd, harassment, even assault. They wanted him in court. They wanted to bury him in legal battles until he was too weak to fight. Grandpa read the papers, his hand steady. "They want to break me with rules now," he whispered. "The same rules they twist for themselves." I felt rage boil in my chest. How could they hurt an old man, a veteran, a man who had given his life to this country? How could they use the law like a weapon? Mark slammed his fist on the table. "Then we fight them in their own game," he said. "We'll bring the neighbors. We'll bring proof. We'll bring the truth." But truth isn't always enough. In court, money talks louder than honesty, and the board was rich, connected, polished like snakes in suits. The days leading to the hearing were tense. Every night I barely slept. Every morning the bikers lined the street. A wall of loyalty around Grandpa's porch. The neighbors brought food, coffee, words of encouragement, but still, I felt fear. Fear that justice doesn't always win. When the day came, we drove to the courthouse. Grandpa sat in his chair, cast still tight on his arm, face calm but eyes sharp. The board members walked in wearing suits, lawyers at their sides, smug grins on their faces. They thought they had already won. The judge entered. The room fell silent, and as the case began, lies filled the air. The board painted Grandpa as a criminal, called the bikers violent, claimed the neighbors were victims of our chaos. I wanted to shout, wanted to stand, but I held my tongue because Grandpa only sat there, calm as stone. Then, when it was our turn, something shifted. Neighbor after neighbor stood up. Mrs. Ramirez, Mr. Cole, even quiet Mr. Yang from the corner house. They told the truth about fines, about threats, about broken arms and broken windows. The bikers stayed silent, their presence enough to fill the room with power, and slowly, I watched the judge's eyes change from doubt to suspicion to something else, maybe belief, maybe justice. The board squirmed in the higher seats. Their lawyers whispered fast, their power cracking under the weight of voices they could not silence. And for the first time, I felt hope again. But hope is fragile, and power is stubborn. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he would review all evidence, which meant the board still had time to twist, still had time to strike back. As we left the courthouse, the board president passed us by. She leaned close to me, her perfume sweet but her words poison. "You think this is over?" she whispered. "We haven't even started." Her smile was cold, her eyes sharper than knives, and in that moment, I knew Grandpa was right. The worst wasn't behind us. It was waiting ahead. We left that courthouse with heavy hearts. The board had lied with straight faces. Their lawyers had twisted every word, and the judge had given them more time. Grandpa sat in his chair, quiet, but I could see the storm behind his eyes. Mark walked beside us, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. "They want a war in court," he growled. "But we fight where we're strongest, in the streets." That night, the bikers gathered at our house, engines off, voices low, flames from the fire pit lighting their faces. It wasn't a party. It was war council. Mark leaned forward, eyes locked on me. "They think they own this neighborhood," he said, "but power leaves fingerprints, and I bet they're dirtier than they look." We started digging, not with shovels, but with questions. Phone calls, late-night drives past the HOA office, and what we found shook even me. The HOA president, the woman who smiled in court while lying through her teeth, had been funneling money from the HOA accounts, fines that neighbors paid, fees for parking violations, even donations meant for community events. All of it was disappearing into consulting fees. And the consult Paul, aunt, her own brother-in-law. We found papers, receipts, bank records. The bikers had friends in places the HOA couldn't reach. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth came out. When I showed Grandpa the evidence, his lips curled into the faintest smile. "Truth is like fire," he said. "It burns even when they hide it." But truth alone wasn't enough. We needed the neighborhood. We needed everyone to see what their leaders were hiding. So we called a meeting, not in the HOA office, but in our own driveway. At first, a few came, then a few more. By sunset, the street was full. Grandpa sat at the front, cast on his arm, the bikers standing like statues behind him. I stepped forward, papers in my hands, voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. I told them everything. The stolen money, the fake fines, the lies. Gasps filled the air. Neighbors whispered to each other. Shock spreading like fire through dry grass. When I held up the receipts, the proof, silence fell. And in that silence, I heard it. The sound of power breaking. Mrs. Ramirez stood first. "I paid them $300 for a mailbox violation," she shouted. "And they stole it." Mr. Cole raised his voice. "They fined me 5 times for grass, and all that money's gone." Voices rose. Anger grew. And for the first time, the board had more enemies than followers. But anger is dangerous, and the board knew how to use it. The next morning, flyers appeared on every doorstep. Bold letters screamed, "Beware of the gang next door." Photos of the bikers were printed, distorted, painted as criminals. They called Grandpa a fraud, called me a liar, called our whole family a threat to peace. Neighbors who had shouted with us last night now looked uncertain. Fear had returned, and fear spreads fast. Mark crumpled the flyer in his fist. "They're desperate," he said. "Desperate men make mistakes." He was right again. That evening, as the sun dipped low, 2 black SUVs rolled onto the street. Not the fake enforcers this time. The board them. Selves, dressed sharp. Sunglasses hiding their eyes. Smug grins pasted on their faces. They stepped out, hands full of legal papers. The president raised her voice, loud enough for every neighbor peeking from behind blinds. "You are all harboring criminals," she shouted. "This gang will destroy your community, and anyone who stands with them will face consequences." Grandpa wheeled forward, slow but steady. His voice cut through the air like steel. "You broke my arm. You broke your promises. And now you break the truth. But you cannot break us." The neighbors stirred, torn between fear and fury. And then, the sound came again. Engines. The bikers rolled forward. Not 10 this time, but 20. A wall of chrome and leather. Filling the street with thunder, the president's face drained of color. Her voice cracked as she tried to keep shouting. But no one listened. The neighbors had seen enough. Mrs. Ramirez marched forward, waving one of the stolen receipts. "You lied to us," she screamed. Others joined. Voices overlapping. Anger now louder than fear. The board stumbled. their papers falling, their power slipping like sand through their fingers. But then, something happened that I'll never forget. One of the bikers pulled out a small black folder. Inside, photos. Photos of the HOA president meeting those masked thugs behind the community hall. Photos of cash changing hands. Proof that the attack on our street, the broken windows, the brick, all of it had been ordered by the board. Gasps turned into shouts. Shouts turned into fury. The board tried to run, but the crowd closed in. Not with fists, not with chains, but with words. "Resign," they shouted. "Resign now." The president's mask cracked, her smile gone, her hands shaking, but she refused to step down. Her voice trembled, but she said, "We'll see you in court. You'll regret this." Then she shoved her way back into the SUV, slamming the door, speeding off into the night with her board behind her. The street was alive with noise, neighbors cheering, bikers laughing, Grandpa smiling through the pain, but I didn't smile, because I saw something the others didn't. As the SUV sped away, the president's eyes met mine through the glass, and in those eyes, I saw fire. Not defeat, not surrender, but revenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the wood, every hum of the wind, felt like a warning. Grandpa slept in his chair. The bikers kept watch outside. But my mind raced. The board was cornered now, exposed, humiliated, hated by the very people they ruled, and cornered enemies are the most dangerous. I kept replaying that look in her eyes. Cold, sharp, burning with the promise of one last strike, and I knew. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The night after the board was exposed, I couldn't close my eyes. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow on the wall felt like a warning. Grandpa sat in his chair by the window, his cast resting heavy on his lap. His eyes half closed, but sharp as ever. The bikers lined the street outside. Engines quiet, but their presence louder than words. The neighbors had started bringing food, folding chairs, even blankets. It felt less like a war zone and more like a camp of resistance. But deep down, we all knew it was only the calm before the storm, because power doesn't die with proof. It dies with fire, and fire always burns before it fades. 2 days passed. Then 3. The board was silent. No letters, no SUVs, no thugs. Some neighbors thought it was over. Some even started smiling again. But Grandpa shook his head. "No one stares you down like that and walks away," he said. "They're planning something." And he was right. On the 4th night, it happened. It started with smoke, thin at first, drifting through the air, curling into my nose while I sat. And on the porch, I thought it was a grill, maybe a neighbor's barbecue. But then I saw the glow, orange, rising from the edge of the street. Near the HOA office, flames. The bikers roared to life, engines shaking the ground as they rushed toward the fire. Neighbors poured out of their homes, shouts filling the air, children crying, dogs barking. The HOA office was burning, and in the flames, I saw movement, figures in black, slipping through the smoke, carrying boxes, papers, hard drives. They weren't running from the fire. They were feeding it. The board was burning their secrets. Mark charged forward. 2 bikers at his side. They tackled one of the figures, dragged him out of the smoke. It wasn't a thug. It was one of the board members, his suit covered in ash. His face twisted in panic. He screamed for release. But the neighbors saw the boxes in his arms, boxes filled with HOA records, files that could prove everything. And then the truth hit us all at once. They weren't just corrupt. They were destroying every piece of evidence we had. The crowd shouted, voices overlapping. "Thieves! Criminals! Arsonists!" The board member squirmed, but Mark held him firm. The fire roared higher, sparks flying into the night sky. The whole street glowed red, as if the neighborhood itself was bleeding. Grandpa wheeled himself forward, his voice low but sharp. "Tell the truth," he demanded, "or the fire will eat more than your office." The man broke, his words spilling out in gasps. "It wasn't me. It was her. The president told us. She said burn it all. Hide the money. Hide the names." The neighbors gasped. Some cursed. Some cheered. The bikers dragged the man aside, the fire department finally arriving with sirens blaring, but by the time the flames were put out, the office was gone. Ashes, nothing left but smoke and the stench of sea. Kretz lost. The board thought they had won that night. No papers, no files, no proof, but they forgot something. People are proof too, and the whole neighborhood had seen it. The night after the board was exposed, I couldn't close my eyes. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow on the wall felt like a warning. Grandpa sat in his chair by the window, his cast resting heavy on his lap, his eyes half closed but sharp as ever. The bikers lined the street outside, engines quiet, but their presence louder than words. The neighbors had started bringing food, folding chairs, even blankets. It felt less like a war zone, and more like a camp of resistance. But deep down, we all knew it was only the calm before the storm, because power doesn't die with proof. It dies with fire, and fire always burns before it fades. 2 days passed, then 3. The board was silent. No letters, no SUVs, no thugs. Some neighbors thought it was over. Some even started smiling again, but Grandpa shook his head. "No one stares you down like that and walks away," he said. "They're planning something." And he was right. On the 4th night, it happened. It started with smoke, thin at first, drifting through the air, curling into my nose while I sat on the porch. I thought it was a grill, maybe a neighbor's barbecue. But then I saw the glow, orange, rising from the edge of the street, near the HOA office. Flames. The bikers roared to life, engines shaking the ground as they rushed toward the fire. Neighbors poured out of their homes, shouts filling the air, children crying, dogs barking. The HOA office was burning, and in the flames, I saw movement, figures in black, slipping through the smoke, carrying boxes, papers, hard drives. They weren't running from the fire, they were feeding it. The board was burning their secrets. Mark charged forward, 2 bikers at his side. They tackled one of the figures, dragged him out of the smoke. It wasn't a thug, it was one of the board members, his suit covered in ash, his face twisted in panic. He screamed for release, but the neighbors saw the boxes in his arms, boxes filled with HOA records, files that could prove everything. And then the truth hit us all at once. They weren't just corrupt, they were destroying every piece of evidence we had. The crowd shouted, voices overlapping. Thieves! Criminals! Arsonists! The board member squirmed, but Mark held him firm. The fire roared higher, sparks flying into the night sky. The whole street glowed red, as if the neighborhood itself was bleeding. Grandpa wheeled himself forward, his voice low but sharp. "Tell the truth," he demanded, "or the fire will eat more than your office." The man broke, his words spilling out in gasps. "It wasn't me. It was her. The president told us. She said burn it all, hide the money, hide the names." The neighbors gasped. Some cursed, some cheered. The bikers dragged the man aside, the fire department finally arriving with sirens blaring. But by the time the flames were put out, the office was gone. Ashes, nothing left but smoke and the stench of secrets lost. The board thought they had won that night. No papers, no files, no proof. But they forgot something. People are proof too, and the whole neighborhood had seen it. The next morning, the street was buzzing, every porch alive with voices, every neighbor telling their story, every lie of the HOA now out in the open. We didn't need files anymore. We had witnesses. But the board didn't crawl away in shame. No, they doubled down. Later that day, a letter came from their lawyers, not to Grandpa this time, to the entire neighborhood. It said we were in violation of community safety, that our protests, our gatherings, even our conversations were illegal. They threatened fines, eviction, foreclosure. They wanted to scare us back into silence, but something had changed. We weren't scared anymore. Or neighbors tore up the letters. Some burned them right in the street. The bikers cheered. Mark grinned. Grandpa smiled faintly. The board's weapon had lost its power. Paper burns. And we had already seen it turn to ash. That night, we gathered again in our driveway. The neighbors wanted answers. Wanted a plan. Mark stood tall, his leather jacket gleaming under the porch light. "They think fire scares us," he said. "But fire also lights the truth." Then he held up something I hadn't expected. A hard drive, black, scorched on the edges, but still intact. One of the bikers had grabbed it from the burning office before the flames swallowed it whole. The crowd erupted in cheers. Inside that drive could be everything we needed: proof of the stolen money, proof of the lies, maybe even proof of the hired thugs. But we had a problem. The board knew it too, and they would do anything to get it back. For the next 2 nights, we took turns guarding it. The bikers never left. Neighbors brought food and coffee. Grandpa stayed awake longer than his body should have allowed. Every knock at the door made my stomach twist. Every car passing in the night made my heart race. And then, on the 3rd night, they came. Not thugs this time, not masked men with bats, something worse. Lawyers, sheriffs, a court order. They arrived with papers demanding the hard drive, claiming it was HOA property. The sheriff's eyes were tired. He didn't want to be there. But the law was the law, and the board had twisted it again. Mark refused. Neighbors shouted. Grandpa sat silent, staring at the paper in the sheriff's hand. Finally, Grandpa spoke. "If you take that drive," he said, "you're not just taking from me. You're taking from every honest family here." The sheriff hesitated, his hand trembling, eyes darting between the angry crowd and the legal order in his hand. And in that moment, I realized something. The battle wasn't just on the street anymore. It was in the system itself, and the system was already cracked. The sheriff left that night without the drive, but his words echoed in my head. "They'll be back, with more than paper next time." Grandpa sighed, leaned back in his chair, and whispered, "The fire isn't out yet. It's only spreading." And he was right, because when the board couldn't silence us with paper, or scare us with thugs, or burn away the truth with fire, there was only one thing left for them to try: violence. The night after the sheriff left, I didn't sleep. Neither did the bikers, neither did Grandpa. We all knew the board wasn't finished. Not yet. Not when the hard drive was still in our hands. Mark sat at the table, his leather jacket tossed over the chair, his tattoos glowing under the dim kitchen light. He stared at the drive, that little black box, scorched on the edges but alive inside. "That right there," he muttered, "is their coffin." But coffins don't bury themselves, and the board wasn't ready to die. The next morning, a notice appeared on every door, a summons. The board had pushed the case to federal court, bigger judges, bigger lawyers, higher stakes. They wanted to drag us into a place where their money and connections could crush us like ants. Grandpa read the paper, his lips curling into a half-smile. "They're running scared," he whispered, "and scared men get reckless." Still, my stomach churned. Court wasn't like the street. There were no engines, no fists, no fire pits, only rules. And rules had always been the board's weapon. The hearing was set for 1 week later. 7 days, 7 nights of waiting, planning, and watching the board circle like vultures. During that week, the neighborhood grew tighter. More neighbors joined us. Some who had been silent finally spoke. We weren't just a family anymore. We were a movement. Lawn chairs lined the street. Grills smoked with shared meals. Kids played while bikers watched over them like guard. Ions, and in that strange way, it felt almost like freedom. But freedom always attracts chains. On the 5th night, the board struck again. Not with papers, not with fire, but with men. 3 SUVs rolled into the street just after midnight, headlights off, engines low, doors slammed, and a dozen men stepped out. Not board members this time, not even the fake enforcers we had seen before. These were hired professionals, tall, broad, black jackets, earpieces tucked into their collars, security contractors, mercenaries for hire. They walked straight toward our house. No words, no hesitation, and then the engines roared to life. The bikers, Mark at the front, eyes blazing, fists ready. The street became a wall of leather and chrome. Neighbors shouted from porches. Children pulled inside. The night filled with a tension so heavy it felt like breathing smoke. One of the mercenaries stepped forward, voice low but sharp. "Hand over the drive, or this street burns next." Mark's laugh was dark. "You boys should have stayed in the city." The standoff lasted seconds, but it felt like hours. Engines growled. Boots scraped asphalt. Fists tightened. Then it broke. Chaos. Fists flew. Chains cracked. Engines screamed. The mercenaries were strong, trained. But they weren't family. The bikers fought with loyalty, with fury, with the kind of strength that comes when you're defending blood. Neighbors threw rocks, shouted curses, slammed pots and pans to drown the mercenaries' orders. I stood in the middle of it all, clutching the hard drive like it was life itself. One of the mercenaries lunged at me, his hand reaching for the drive, but Grandpa's voice cut through the night. Not my grandson. And then Mark was there. His fist landed like a hammer. The man dropped. Out cold on the pavement, the fight ended as fast as it began. The mercenaries limped back to their SUVs, bruised, bloodied, humiliated. They sped off into the night, leaving the street echoing with victory cries. But it didn't feel like victory, because I knew what was next. If fists failed, if fire failed, if lies failed, the board would pour everything into the courtroom, and so the day came. We walked into federal court like soldiers walking into war. Grandpa in his chair, bikers behind him like shadows, neighbors filling the benches. On the other side, the board sat polished and smug, their lawyers sleek as snakes. They thought money could silence truth. They thought suits could scare leather, but they didn't know us. The judge entered. Silence fell, and the battle began. The board's lawyers spun lies with silver tongues. They painted us as criminals, gangsters, violent rebels tearing down a peaceful community. They called Grandpa a manipulator, called the bikers outlaws, called the neighbors brainwashed fools. Their words dripped poison, and for a while, I saw the judge listening too closely. But then it was our turn. Grandpa didn't speak much. He didn't have to. His broken arm spoke for him. His quiet dignity cut through their noise like a blade. Then the neighbors stood, one by one, Mrs. Ramirez, Mr. Cole, Mr. Yang, even little Sarah from across the street who held up a picture of her broken swing and said, "They fined my mom for this." And then, the proof, Mark held up the hard drive, scorched, cracked, but alive. Inside it, files played on the screen, bank records, emails, contracts, proof of the stolen money, proof of the thugs, proof of the lies. Gasps filled the courtroom. The board president's face drained of color. Her smile cracked. Her eyes darted like trapped animals. The judge leaned forward, tapping his gavel for silence, and for the first time, his eyes looked not at us, but at them. The board. The trial stretched for hours, evidence after evidence, testimony after testimony. The walls of lies crumbled until nothing was left but truth. When it ended, the judge didn't rule that instant. He said that he would return with a decision in 2 days, 2 days of waiting, 2 days of silence, 2 days where anything could happen. We left the courthouse with heads high, but hearts heavy. The bikers walked in silence. The neighbors, too. Grandpa wheeled beside me, his voice low. They're cornered now, and cornered beasts bite hardest. That night, I sat awake again. Every creak in the house, every hum of the wind, felt like footsteps. The board had lost everything in that courtroom, but the decision wasn't final, and I knew, deep in my gut, they would make one last move, one desperate, dangerous move, because sometimes, when liars are exposed, they don't surrender, they explode. And I couldn't shake the question running in my mind, when that explosion comes, will we be strong enough to stand it? 2 days. That's how long we waited for the judge's decision. 2 days of silence. 2 days of whispers. 2 days of watching shadows move outside our windows. The bikers never left. Their engines idled low at night like growling watchdogs. The neighbors kept guard too. Lawn chairs on porches, flashlights sweeping the dark. Grandpa barely slept, his cast heavy on his lap, his eyes sharper than any blade. We all knew the board wouldn't sit quiet while the truth was in the judge's hands. And we were right. The night before the ruling, it happened. I woke to the sound of breaking glass, the front window shattered, the cold air rushing in. I grabbed the flashlight, heart pounding in my chest, through the shards. I saw them, the board president, her perfect hair undone, her face twisted with rage. Behind her, 2 men I didn't recognize, holding cans of gasoline. My stomach dropped. They weren't here to scare us this time. They were here to end it. "Give me the drive," she screamed, her voice cracking like thunder. Grandpa wheeled forward, calm as ever, his cast lifted like a shield. "You already burned your house," he said softly. "You won't burn mine." She snarled, motioned to her men. They raised the cans, ready to flood our porch with fire. But then, the roar came. Engines, louder than ever. The bikers burst from the street, headlights slicing the night, Mark at the front. Fury written across his face. They surrounded the house, chrome gleaming, boots stomping pavement. The president froze. Her men froze too. The bikers moved fast, ripping the cans from their hands, dragging them into the street. Neighbors poured out of their homes, cameras flashing, voices rising. The president's mask finally cracked, her perfect image shattered under the weight of 100 eyes. She tried to run, but Grandpa's voice stopped her cold. "You broke my arm," he said, his words slicing the silence. "Now the truth will break you." The bikers held her there until the sheriff arrived. This time, he didn't come with papers. He came with handcuffs. The board president was arrested that night, her men too. The neighborhood erupted in cheers, kids clapping, neighbors hugging, bikers raising fists to the sky. But even in victory, Grandpa sat quiet. "This isn't just about one woman," he whispered. "It's about power. And power always tries to rise again." The next morning, Shreki, we returned to the courthouse. The air was heavy, the benches packed. The board members who hadn't been arrested sat pale and shaking. When the judge entered, silence fell. He read slowly, carefully, his voice echoing in the room. The HOA board had been found guilty. Fraud, extortion, harassment, conspiracy. The words rolled like thunder, shaking the room with every strike. The board was dissolved, every fine was voided, every stolen dollar ordered to be returned. The president would face trial for arson and assault. The others banned from ever holding community office again. Gasps filled the air. Then cheers. Then tears. The neighbors hugged each other. Mrs. Ramirez sobbed into Mr. Cole's shoulder. Even Quinn, at Mr. Yang, smiled wide. The bikers laughed, their voices booming like victory bells. And Grandpa? He just leaned back in his chair, his eyes glistening but his smile steady. "Justice," he whispered. "Real justice." When we left the courthouse, the sun was brighter than I had ever seen it. The cul-de-sac felt different too, the air lighter, the silence no longer heavy with fear. Kids played without worry. Neighbors talked openly. The shadow of the board finally gone. The bikers roared one last time, their engines shaking the street. Mark hugged Grandpa, his voice low but warm. "Your family. And family always wins." Grandpa nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Then he turned to me. "Remember this," he said. "Power is just fear wearing a mask, and fear only wins if we bow to it." I'll never forget those words. Weeks passed, the scars of battle fading slowly, the broken window replaced, the ash of the office swept away, the letters burned to nothing but memory. But one thing never faded: the unity. The neighborhood stood taller now, stronger, louder. No board, no bullies, no fake cops could ever silence us again. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the roar of engines in my head. I still see Grandpa's cast, still feel the weight of that hard drive in my hands. But I also see the faces of my neighbors, the smiles that returned after years of fear, the laughter that once again filled the street. And I know, we didn't just fight for Grandpa. We fought for everyone who ever felt small in their own home. We fought for everyone who ever got fined for grass, for mailboxes, for flowers. We fought for freedom on our own front lawns. And we won. So now, I want to ask you, if one day your HOA board turned from petty bullies into full-blown criminals, if they broke your family and burned your peace, would you fight them in court, in the street, in the very heart of your neighborhood, or would you let them win and live in silence?